So I want you to just put yourself in this situation for a second. Imagine it's December 5th, 2008.
Okay.
You're a Dutch Special Forces commander,
Sure.
right? And you are making this terrifying decision to walk point up a hill in Uruzgan, Afghanistan.
Yeah, which is not where a commander normally is.
Exactly right. And the intelligence says that this terrain is like heavily seeded with this brand new, highly lethal type of IED.
Right, the low metal ones.
Yeah. They're designed with high plastic and low metal content. So the military standard metal detectors, completely useless.
Just to totally blind them.
Exactly. So every single footstep you take is literally a gamble with your life. You are intentionally acting as a human mind-clearing device, just so the terrified platoon behind you can survive.
And an unimaginable level of pressure.
It is.
Yeah.
And his internal heart rate monitor is just hammering at like 140 beats per minute. And this is the craziest part, according to his own account, the most terrifying moment of his life wasn't on that mountain.
Yeah, that's the part that really gets you.
Right. It wasn't facing undetectable explosives in a literal war zone. It was sitting in a perfectly safe, quiet, brightly lit doctor's office back home in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And being completely and utterly unable to speak.
And that contrast, that forms the absolute core of what we are analyzing today, because you have this individual who obviously possesses the psychological fortitude to confront literal explosive death without even blinking.
Yeah, absolute nerves of steel.
But then his nervous system completely shuts down when he's faced with just the prospect of revealing a hidden aspect of his own identity in a civilian setting.
Wow.
It really highlights this massive blind spot in how we understand resilience, because the psychological adaptations that guarantee your survival in a high-threat kinetic environment, they can systematically dismantle your ability to function in a low-threat emotional one.
So today on The Deep Dive, we're exploring the staggering life trajectory of Derek De Vries, or Dirk, as he's commonly known. He's a Dutch military veteran whose resume is just... it's insane.
It really covers the absolute highest tiers of service, yeah.
Yeah, the Airmobile Brigade, Special Forces medic, deploying with the BSB, which is the Special Security Brigade.
Yeah.
And he recently released a book called Tweestrijd, which is Dutch for internal conflict.
And we are using that text, along with the really raw, in-depth interview he gave to the Sharpshooters channel, to basically deconstruct this intersection of elite leadership, extreme pressure, and just the grueling cost of hiding who you really are.
Right. And for you listening, even if you aren't dodging IEDs or like training special police in Rio, which we'll get into, Dirk's journey of emotional regulation and unlearning old programming is incredibly relevant for anyone trying to lead authentically.
Absolutely. We're going to trace the whole life cycle of his psychological armor, from his early days navigating this rigid military culture while hiding his sexuality, all the way to high-stakes combat, and then that agonizing process of relearning how to be human.
So let's just start with the visual architecture of the book itself, because I think it sets the stage perfectly. Right. Dirk chose this very specific, old-school camouflage pattern for the cover of Tweestri.
Yeah, it's not just a generic military aesthetic, right? It's highly deliberate.
Exactly. It's a reclamation. Because for a massive portion of his career, Dirk's life was strictly split in two. He's gay, he's married to a man, but for over a decade, while operating at the top of the Dutch military, he kept a complete firewall between his operational identity and his private reality.
And to really understand the weight of that firewall, we have to kind of zoom out and look at the Netherlands in the 1990s, right? Because internationally, the Netherlands during that time was arguably one of the most progressive, socially liberated societies on Earth.
Right. It wasn't like he was growing up in a place where it was strictly outlawed.
No, not at all. He was growing up in the orbit of Amsterdam. He actually describes this really visible, vibrant gay scene, nightclubs, public events, drag queens, total societal integration. It was actively celebrated.
Which introduces this really fascinating paradox, right? If society is broadcasting that this is completely acceptable, why go into such deep hiding?
Yeah, and Dirk is explicit about this. The barrier wasn't external. He knew his parents, his sisters, his core friends. They would have accepted him without a second thought.
So it wasn't fear of his family rejecting him.
Exactly. The barrier was entirely internal. It was rooted in archetypal conditioning. From the time he was a little boy, his one singular goal was to be a soldier.
Right.
And in his mind, reinforced by media and military subculture, the archetype of the soldier was rigidly defined. It was hypermasculine, stoic, aggressively heterosexual.
So when his sexuality started emerging, it didn't fit the mold.
Right. His brain didn't categorize it as an identity. It categorized it as a threat, a mismatch that could derail the only identity he actually cared about.
Wow. And that internal fear got this devastating external validation during his basic training, right? Like around 1999 or 2000.
Yeah, this is a pivotal moment. He's in general military training, which is an environment literally designed to strip away individuality.
And the military had mandated this training module about homosexuality, right?
Yeah.
Like a modernizing box-checking exercise.
Exactly. But the execution on the ground was catastrophically bad. The instructor actively weaponized it. He walked down the line of standing recruits, turning a policy brief into a public interrogation.
Oh, man, in front of everybody.
In front of everyone. He'd stop, single a recruit out, and ask loudly, "Do you like men, Jansma?" And then he reaches Dirk.
And Dirk is just caught in the headlights.
Oh, right, and Dirk simply says no.
Just a 5-second exchange.
Yeah.
But that cements the whole double life. Like, the instructor probably thought it was a joke, but to Dirk's nervous system, it's a clear message. This trait is a vulnerability, and we exploit vulnerabilities here.
And we have to look at the sociology of that harsh humor in the military, right?
Yeah.
Elite teams rely on aggressive banter and teasing. It's an anthropological stress test.
Like testing if you can take the heat.
Exactly. If we can mock you about your big ears or your hometown and you don't break, you prove you have emotional resilience. It builds an incredibly tight bond for the majority of the group.
But the tragedy is that it accidentally builds this invisible, impenetrable prison for the outlier. Because for Dirk, it's not a joke. It's an existential threat to his survival in the pack.
Yeah, he realizes he can't participate authentically without risking excommunication. And the physiological cost of that is staggering. We are talking about chronic, low-grade hypervigilance all day, every day.
Yeah, it's like, think about it like running a heavy software program in the background of your computer.
That's a good way to look at it.
Like on the surface, the screen looks totally fine. Everything seems normal. But the processor is secretly overheating and the battery is just draining rapidly in the background. That's what hiding his core identity did to Dirk.
That is a perfect analogy, because a computer can't sustain that forever without crashing.
Exactly. You can only run that background program for so long before the system just completely fails. And this leads directly to what he calls his twilight years in his mid-20s.
Yeah, this period lasted for about 6 or 7 years, and the juxtaposition here is just jarring. Professionally, he is thriving. He transfers to the highly selective Airmobile Brigade, earns the Red Beret, gets promoted to NCO, taking specialized courses.
Absolutely crushing it on paper.
Right, the epitome of a successful young leader. But personally, he was doubly unhappy and isolated. He admits he intentionally lived like a monk.
Just staying away from home as much as possible.
Exactly. He actively engineered his life with deployments and field exercises, so he never had to sit alone in an empty room and actually confront his isolation.
He was completely loyal to his men and the mission, but totally disloyal to himself.
Yes. But that compounding pressure finally brings us to the hospital moment we started with, the breaking point.
Right. The system starts to buckle, and he realizes he needs help. So he goes to the MGGZ, the Military Mental Health Care Division at the Central Military Hospital.
And just initiating that takes monumental courage. He physically goes to the hospital, walks into the room, sits down with the medical staff, and they just ask him, "How can we help you, Dirk?"
And he literally can't speak.
Yeah.
Like, his vocal cords just paralyze.
Yeah. And this isn't just standard anxiety. This is a severe manifestation of something called context collapse.
Okay, I really want to dig into context collapse because it explains this paralysis perfectly.
So as humans, we naturally compartmentalize our identities, right? You act differently with your family than you do managing subordinates at work or hanging out with friends.
Sure, yeah.
Usually the boundaries are a little porous, your personality bleeds across the lines. But for Dirk, the boundary between his military context and his private context was a titanium vault. He spent his whole adult life making sure those worlds never touched.
Wow. So when he's sitting in a military hospital with military doctors in a military uniform trying to talk about his most fiercely guarded private secret,
his brain's categorization system fundamentally crashes. The contexts violently collide, and his neurological safety protocols just override his conscious desire to speak.
So the silence wasn't even a choice. It was a systemic failure.
Exactly. And the medical staff, they see a highly trained special forces guy in distress, so they default to their own conditioning. They start guessing extreme kinetic trauma.
Right. They're asking about PTSD, suicide, firefights.
Because sexual identity simply didn't exist on their diagnostic radar for an elite operator. They're completely blind to the fact that he's bleeding out from an identity crisis.
That is heartbreaking. So he just sits there, realizes it's impossible to bridge the gap, breaks down in tears, and runs out of the room. He just abandons the whole attempt.
He retreats right back behind the firewall. But, and here's a crucial leadership insight from the text, that suppression started to negatively affect his professional side. The frustration had to leak out somewhere.
Right. He admits he started showing this strange, aggressive behavior.
Yeah.
Like seeking out verbal confrontations with the military police, the marechaussee, just starting fights for no reason.
It's a textbook behavioral leak. When you can't fight your own internal programming, you subconsciously seek out external authority figures to fight instead.
Okay, but this brings up a really complex question. Later on, when he's deployed in Chora, Ruzgan, his company commander finds out about that hospital visit.
Yeah, a commander he explicitly says he trusted 100%.
Right. The commander asks if he's okay, and Dirk lies. He uses a cover story, says it was just a minor burnout. But Dirk also claims he was always authentic as a military professional, even while hiding his personal life. So I have to challenge this. Can you really be an authentic leader if you are utilizing a cover story about your fundamental reality to a commander you supposedly trust?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It forces us to distinguish between tactical effectiveness and holistic authenticity.
Okay, explain that.
Well, Dirk was undeniably effective. He was authentic in his bravery, his strategic choices, his commitment to his men. But you can't claim holistic authenticity when a massive chunk of your cognitive bandwidth is dedicated to a defensive lie. The mask was omnipresent.
But at the same time, maintaining that mask while navigating actual combat requires an unbelievable level of emotional regulation. Which brings us to that fateful night in Afghanistan, December 5th, 2008.
Yeah. Sinterklaas, ironically, back in the Netherlands. But Dirk is near Kalakala Hill, a notoriously hostile area.
And we talked about the IED threat earlier. The Taliban had shifted to those plastic low-metal explosives, and an Australian Bushmaster vehicle had just hit a 15-kilo bomb.
Right, and the terrifying part was that it wasn't detected beforehand. The metal detectors were completely beaten, so the terrain transitions from just a tactical obstacle to this omnipresent, undetectable, mortal terror.
And Dirk's unit gets ordered to occupy Kalakala Hill at night to prevent an attack. And the platoon is understandably terrified.
The text actually emphasizes this near-mutinous level of tension. Because fear is contagious, right? When you face an invisible, lethal threat, your amygdala, your brain's threat center hijacks your higher cognitive functions.
Your vision narrows, you make bad decisions.
Exactly. The unit was on the verge of physiological panic.
So Dirk, as the squad commander, is supposed to be in the middle of the patrol formation, right, for command and control. But sensing the panic, he decides to take the point, to walk first.
Which is incredibly unorthodox for a commander.
He pulls his second-in-command aside and says, "Leave a wide gap. If I step on a mine, you take over." And he starts walking. His heart is at 140 BPM. He's questioning his own sanity, but outwardly, absolute unbreakable calm.
And this is a masterclass in emotional regulation. By downregulating his outward stress markers, controlling his breathing, his face, he downregulated the stress of the entire group.
Because calm is contagious too.
Exactly. Mirror neurons. He short-circuited their amygdala hijack by providing visual proof of safety. He absorbed the highest risk to preserve their cognitive function.
It redefines leading by example, doesn't it? It's not just a corporate buzzword. Here it meant physically acting as a shield. But, the interviewer in the source actually brings up an alternative tactic.
Oh, about vulnerability.
Yeah. He suggests that sometimes showing vulnerability, like stopping and telling the team, "I'm scared too, but we'll do this together," can also be super effective.
And it is effective in a lot of modern environments. It builds trust. But Dirk acknowledges he simply didn't have that tool in his kit at the time.
Because he had spent a decade building an armor of invincibility.
Right. His capacity for vulnerability had completely atrophied.
Which makes total sense, but for the listener, it's worth reflecting on. When do you project unbreakable calm as a leader, and when do you share the fear? Because for Dirk, projecting calm worked in combat, but it completely broke him as a normal human.
Yeah, when he finally rotates out of the Airmobile Brigade after like 10 or 11 years, the bill for all that psychological armor comes due.
He describes himself using the Dutch word afgestompt.
Right.
Right. meaning numb, dulled.
Deadened. He was a master of tactical survival, but socially and communicatively, he was just completely numb. The armor had basically fused to his skin.
And this deficit becomes almost comically obvious when he transfers to the BSP, the Special Security Brigade.
Yeah.
Because their mandate is completely different.
Oh, vastly different. They operate in the civilian public domain. VIP security, diplomats, you have to blend in.
You have to be socially fluid. You can't look like a hypervigilant special forces killer.
Exactly. And Dirk is painfully unsuited for this. The source details this training exercise at Utrecht Central train station that just perfectly captures it.
Okay, I love this story. It's the non-police behavior test. Set it up for us.
So he's in civilian clothes, dressed like a casual fitness instructor, he says. An instructor points to a random civilian on a bench and says, "You have 10 minutes. Sit next to them, strike up a conversation, and get their name and travel destination."
Which, for a normal person, is easy. You complain about the train delay, you talk about the weather, small talk.
Right, social grease. But Dirk has no social grease. His brain only has scripts for issuing orders or suppressing threats.
So he sits down, and he's just staring at this poor civilian with his intense, unblinking, room-clearing stare. The clock is ticking down.
It's just profound awkwardness. And finally, with 3 minutes left, he panics. He defaults to this aggressive interrogation tactic and just barks at the guy, "Did you watch football?"
Out of nowhere, with zero context, the civilian must have been terrified.
The guy recoiled like Doc was deranged. The instructors were laughing, but it really showed a grim reality. Dirk was failing a basic test of human interaction.
It's like I picture the T-1000 Terminator trying to make small talk. The exact posture that saved his men on Kalakala Hill made him utterly terrifying in a train station.
The armor was actively repelling people, but the fix the instructors used was actually brilliant in its simplicity.
Yeah, they didn't send him to years of therapy immediately. They just gave him a pair of glasses.
Right. A physical pattern interrupt. Humans scan faces for threat indicators. Dirk's set jaw and stare broadcasted a high threat. Glasses alter the angularity of the face, softening the visual cues.
It breaks the warrior aesthetic.
Exactly. When he wore the glasses, civilians subconsciously registered a lower threat level, which gave Dirk a fraction of a second of grace to realize he didn't need to act like a threat.
But he still had to actively rewire his brain, right?
Right.
Like exposure therapy.
Oh, yeah. He had to manually rebuild the capacity for small talk. He forced himself to talk to strangers at the civilian gym. He treated emotional fluidity as a tactical drill.
He had to unlearn the soldier, which is profound. And I think for the listener, it's worth asking, how often do we carry the rigid armor from our own specific profession or past traumas into everyday social situations and just completely alienate the people around us?
It happens all the time. But Dirk's persistence in rewiring himself is what unlocked the most complex phase of his career. Because he didn't lose his tactical lethality, he integrated it with this newly rebuilt empathy.
Which made him the perfect guy to train one of the most intense police units on the planet, the BOPE in Brazil.
Yeah, the Batalhão de Operações Policiais Especiais in Rio de Janeiro.
Operating in over 1,000 favelas. And Dirk actually compares the favela environment directly to counterinsurgency warfare against the Taliban.
Because it is. It's a hyper-dense urban battlefield. The cartel members don't wear uniforms. They blend in with millions of civilians. Threats can come from 360 degrees, overlapping structures, constant verticality.
And the statistic he gives is just insane. When a BOPE patrol goes into a favela, there is an 80% chance of a lethal firefight.
80%. Every single day.
And Dirk is there teaching TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, including modern stuff like dealing with cartel drone warfare. But the students themselves are fascinating.
They are. They aren't 20-year-old recruits. They are older, in their 30s and 40s, incredibly fit, and a quarter of his class had already been shot or wounded in combat.
He mentions an operator walking into a commander's office who had literally just been shot in a firefight days prior. That is their baseline reality.
So Dirk doesn't have to explain why the training matters. They know. They are highly motivated students of survival.
And Dirk says they have this palpable warrior mindset, like a silent aura that instantly tells you not to mess with them. Which makes me wonder, Can you train that mindset, or is it purely a product of surviving extreme environments like the favelas?
It's really the product of survival. And for Dirk to earn their respect, he has to flawlessly execute that integration we talked about. He has to use his empathy to bridge language barriers, teaching complex medicine in a mix of English, Spanish, and Portuguese, but simultaneously project his hardened military background so they don't dismiss him as just an academic.
He uses his combat experience not as a wall to hide behind, but as a bridge to connect with them.
Exactly. The integration is finally functional. The armor is a tool now, not a prison.
Which leads right into this really reflective part of the interview, where Dirk and the interviewer, who are both in their 40s now, talk about aging, longevity, and what it means to be a warrior at this stage in life.
Yeah, it's a great analysis of shifting priorities, because physically they both feel stronger than they did in their 20s. But their goals have changed. Dirk prefers weightlifting over spontaneous marathons now.
Right, maintaining a robust foundation.
Yeah.
But the interviewer said something interesting. He's like, give me a goal. Tell me to deadlift 200 kilograms or run a marathon in 6 months, and I can do it. Dirk totally agrees. The drive is still there.
The engine hasn't lost horsepower, they're just more selective about when they redline it. The motivation has shifted from external validation to internal mastery.
And his risk calculus has fundamentally changed because he's finally living authentically. He's openly gay. He's been with his husband for over 12 years.
He built a reality he wants to participate in, not escape from. Back in his 20s, he took crazy risks to distract himself. Now, his husband acts as a mirror.
Yeah, before taking a dangerous assignment abroad, his husband will ask, is this risk really necessary?
It forces Dirk to check his ego. Is he doing it for the mission, or just running on old, outdated programming to prove he's still a tough guy?
And I think we all have that internal mirror, whether it's a spouse, a mentor, or just our own maturity, asking us if the relentless pursuit of our goals is actually serving us.
And Dirk normalizing this, normalizing self-care and identity struggles, is sending shockwaves through the tactical community.
The reaction to the book has been massive. He gets messages from young cadets, but also from the old guard.
Yeah, he mentions a tough BSB veteran who read the book and had to just sit in silence on his couch for an hour to process it because it hit him so hard.
It provided a vocabulary for a silent struggle that so many people face, even if their specific secret isn't their sexuality. The exhaustion of the warrior phase is universal.
Because true professionalism isn't about ignoring your humanity. Integrating your holistic self is the foundation of sustainable performance.
So just zooming out on Dirk De Vries' incredible trajectory, from a young soldier hiding his true self, to leading a terrified platoon up an IED-laden hill, to finding his humanity with a pair of glasses at a train station, and finally training elite forces in Brazil.
It reminds us that true leadership requires peeling off the armor when it's no longer serving you, and having the courage to integrate all parts of your identity.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering question to think about. We spend millions of dollars and years of training to teach people how to be unbreakable soldiers. We teach them to endure pressure and compartmentalize fear. But looking at Dirk's struggle to simply make conversation at a train station or speak in a doctor's office, maybe the real question is, why do we spend absolutely zero time teaching them how to unlearn the soldier so they can survive being human?